It is 6 o'clock. We will come back to order. This is the Elections Committee, our evening hearing. So a quorum, well, I guess we only recessed, but a quorum would be present anyway, but we do anyway have a quorum on its own merits. So there is a quorum present. Okay, got it. So the first bill on the agenda is House File 4598. Majority Leader Long, welcome to the Elections Committee. I will move House File 4598 be re-referred to the State and Local Government Finance and Policy Committee. Would you like me to move the A1 amendment?
Please,
Representative Long. Okay, I will move the A1 amendment. Is this just put the bill in the shape you would like?
Yes, Mr.
Okay. Is there any discussion to the amendment? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the amendment is adopted. So Representative Long, to your bill as amended.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This good government constitutional amendment stands for the basic principle that voters should choose their legislators, but legislators should not choose their voters. As folks know, we've been in split government for the last 50 years when districts have been drawn. In 2020, we had a DFL governor and House and a GOP Senate. In 2010, we had a DFL governor and a GOP legislature. In 2000, a GOP House, Democratic Senate, and Jesse Ventura as governor. By sheer luck, the courts have been drawing our maps for the last 50 years. The first bill I ever passed was to help improve the census to ensure we were maximizing our chances of keeping our congressional seat and maintaining valuable federal investments. Also, when I was first elected at freshman orientation, I approached a number of my new GOP colleagues with one question. We were a split legislature at the time, and it seemed unlikely one party would gain complete control. Why not pass nonpartisan redistricting? Unfortunately, I didn't have any takers at the time. When you're right up against an election, everybody believes that they're going to win. So we missed an opportunity before the last census, but we are far enough out now that it's anybody's guess who will be in charge in 2030. Our court-drawn maps have largely served Minnesotans well, but we take for granted that this is the way it will always be. One need only look to Wisconsin to see the undemocratic impact that gerrymandered maps can have, or if you prefer a Democratic gerrymander, look to Illinois. Trust in our government is important. In fact, it's the bedrock of our government. If we erode that trust, the public will rightly grow skeptical of our institutions and our legislative process. Minnesotans vote in the highest rates in the country. We have some of the highest civic participation across many measures. Fairness and public participation are Minnesota values. That's why we should take the important step of amending our Constitution to say that no matter who is in charge, our maps should be fair. This bill learns from best practices and mistakes from other states. It includes many checks and balances to ensure that the process is fair and the commissioners as impartial as possible. The principles are largely consistent with those used by the Minnesota courts to draw our maps and are taken from the work of the House Redistricting Committee in 2021. We've engaged with dozens of stakeholders, both in-state and nationally, to get feedback as we prepared this bill, and I believe this proposal is among the best in the country. But our work is not done. The amendment that I offered today was at the request and in conversation with Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and reflects language that they've worked hard on. I appreciate as well the bill that Chair Klevorn is bringing forward today, as there are many similarities, and I look forward to continuing to engage so that we can work towards one consensus constitutional amendment for the ballot. The second component in the Good Government Amendment would incorporate the current one-year House rule prohibiting lobbying from retired members into the Constitution. Right now, this is unenforceable. As soon as a member leaves their legislative seat, they are no longer subject to the House rules. This is consistent with the one-year lobbying ban that Congress has set for itself, and we would leave the definition of lobbying to be set by the legislature as it could evolve over time with changing practices. We've seen instances in the past of legislators resigning in the middle of session to become lobbyists, often working on bills that they were just negotiating the week before. We know this, too, undermines trust in our democracy. The third provision in this amendment would increase legislative scheduling flexibility. It would do this by removing the mandatory adjournment date and the cap on the days of meeting per biennium. This is at its core a balance of powers issue with the executive. Given our limitation on calling ourselves into session, we have seen abuses by executives of both parties. 3 examples. Unallotment has been used 6 times since 1980 to unilaterally reject legislative appropriations, including 3 times by Governor Pawlenty. Governor Dayton line item vetoed the legislative pay, holding it hostage to an unrelated policy demand, which prompted a constitutional crisis. And if we want to go more recent in the COVID outbreak, our emergency powers laws was based on a lack of trust that the governor would call us back into session, which resulted in the most special sessions in state history. The legislature is the closest branch to the people, and our voters deserve fair representation in the legislative process. We should be on equal footing with the governor in terms of when we can meet. I appreciate the opportunity for the discussion today, and I know there are several testifiers.
Thank you for your testimony, Majority Leader Long. So we do have 4 people who've signed up to testify. First on the list is Michael Lee. And after Michael Lee will be Sarah Lopez. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. I am Michael Lee. I am senior counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University School of Law, where my work focuses on redistricting and elections. My remarks today will be limited to the redistricting portions of House File 4598. Thank you to the committee members for the opportunity today to testify on a piece of legislation that we at the Brennan Center consider that, if it were passed, would be one of the most significant and strongest redistricting reforms ever enacted by any legislative body. As we said in our remarks, House File 4598 is a robust landmark bill that would transform Minnesota's redistricting process into one of the fairest in the nation, and more importantly, safeguard Minnesotans from the type of abuses that have occurred in recent years in neighboring Wisconsin, and frankly in states up and down the Midwest, both Republican-controlled states and Democratic-controlled states. Although Minnesota so far has been spared the abuses that have been seen in other states, it came close in 2010 to being in the same situation as Wisconsin, with Governor Mark Dayton winning his race for governor by only around 8,700 votes, the narrowest of possible margins. In a highly competitive state like Minnesota, it is not impossible to imagine situations where either party, frankly, could be in control with a legislative trifecta in 2031 when maps are next to be redrawn. This, in short, is not a time to be timid or gun-shy. There are legions of examples of states around the country where legislators and lawmakers had a chance to adopt redistricting reforms but didn't, because they were confident about what the politics of the future would look like. And then they were only surprised to find out that their party ended up in the minority and got the short end of the gerrymandering stick. House File 4598 is a strong, well-designed reform in line with best practices from around the nation. After the 2010 redistricting cycle, we at the Brennan Center went around the country and interviewed more than 100 redistricting commissioners and others who had been involved in the redistricting process. And our interviews included not only independent commissions like those used in California and Arizona, but also less independent and more politically connected or politically appointed commissions like those used in New Jersey. What we found in a piece published in 2018 was that design matters, with truly independent commissions performing much better on a whole range of options. And you saw that again this cycle with a number of non-independent commissions deadlocking, or worse, as in Ohio, passing maps on a party line basis that not surprisingly turned out to be aggressive gerrymanders. In short, not all commissions are equal. In our written testimony, we outlined in greater detail 4 features of House File 4598 that in particular we believe make it well structured, with provisions that work in tandem to safeguard the redistricting process. And that really is the key. You often have people who try to pick apart a redistricting reform proposal by saying they could see how this provision or that provision might fail. But the question isn't whether a provision might fail by itself. The question is whether there are checks and balances that prevent that failure from being fatal. And we believe in a well-designed proposal like House File 4598 that closely follows national best practices there are. I will close by saying this. It is rare that you see a legislative body seriously consider redistricting reforms that are this good. I've been doing this a long time, and what you normally get from legislatures is something that is a reform in name only. And frankly, when people first approached us about lawmakers in Minnesota wanting to do reforms, frankly, there was cynicism. We weren't sure how far this was going to go, but it's gotten very far, and I want to commend the Minnesota legislature for taking the issue of democracy seriously. House File 4598 is a landmark bill that would continue Minnesota's long and storied tradition of being a leader and a model for states around the nation on how to make sure that voters come first. I urge passage of House File 4598 and would be happy to answer any questions, provide additional information, or be helpful in whatever way we can. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The next testifier is Sarah Lopez, and after Sarah Lopez will be Robert Hyder. And we have asked testifiers to keep their remarks to about 2 minutes. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Hello, my name is Sarah Lopez. I'm the Director of Policy at Unidos, Minnesota. They're members of the Elections Committee and Chair Freiberg. Unidos Minnesota is an immigrant-led, multiracial, statewide organization. We build power for Minnesota working families to advance social, racial, and economic justice across the state, and with organizing operations in greater Minnesota and the metro area. I also became a U.S. citizen in 2015, and I'm grateful that I get to participate in our democracy every day. Sorry about that. I'm here to testify in support of the Good Governance Amendment, House File 4598, because Minnesota should be a place where our democracy is reflective of our values. Decision-making is balanced and fair, and people are at the heart of every decision. Everybody should be able to participate in their democracy, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. That is why we support the establishment of an independent Redistricting Commission to provide more transparency and more public input in the map design process and to prevent gerrymandering. We must place interests first, community interests first, and ensure Minnesota continues its 5 decades-long tradition of nonpartisan redistricting through an independent commission rather than the courts. We also support ending the legislator to lobbyist self-dealing cycle by preventing current and former legislators from being lobbyists for a year after their service ends. Dozens of former legislators are current lobbyists, some resigning in the middle of their term to immediately become highly paid lobbyists. We're also supporting improving legislative flexibility to perform constitutionally mandated duties. This amendment will ensure all policymakers, regardless of income, race, or geography, have the time, resources, and ability to respond to constituent and emerging policy issues. Our grassroots work at Unidos Minnesota consistently points at the need to continue strengthening our democratic institutions and be responsive to all. For new Americans like myself, we share the common value of believing in working alongside you to protect our democracy. Having robust institutions centering people is at the heart of the Good Governance Amendment. We hope you support House File 4598. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The next testifier is Robert Hyder, and after Robert Hyder will be David Fisher. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Chair Freiberg, members of the committee, my name is Robert Hyder, and I am the Legislative Director at Take Action Minnesota. We are a grassroots, multiracial people's organization that believes in a democracy and government that works for us all. With our members, we advocate for policies that promote justice and fairness. I am here today to share our strong support for House File 4598. Banning gerrymandering while establishing and empowering an independent redistricting commission will strengthen our democracy by giving Minnesotans maps that represent our geographic, demographic, and partisan makeup of our state. The practice of gerrymandering often allows politicians to choose their voters as opposed to voters having the ability to choose those who represent them. Such a dynamic explains why relatively few districts across the country and here in Minnesota are considered competitive. This naturally results in too many legislative districts becoming sorts of echo chambers, where elected officials are listening to those who share their similar ideologies and demographics rather than listening to broader bases of voters who hold differing views or opinions. I was born and raised in North Dakota, where a federal judge recently held that their maps violated the Voting Rights Act by diluting the strength of 2 Native American tribes and ordered that new districts be drawn. On the flip side of that, under this plan, tribal nations and communities of interest would be prioritized in drawing district lines while ensuring that the makeup of the commission will represent the demographic and geographic diversity of Minnesota. At a time when democracy is under attack across the country, opening up the redistricting process to bring in more transparency will put the interests of communities across Minnesota ahead of any political motivations of the politicians who govern them. In a similar vein, ending the legislator to lobbyist self-dealing cycle will strengthen Minnesotans' trust in this institution and the way in which decisions are made. Democracy is more than a simple act of participating in elections. It is a collective practice that includes how legislative districts are drawn and who has influence in our legislature and how that influence is exerted. Our organization's members care deeply about the state of our democracy and actively participate in that collective process. That is why I'm here today to urge this amendment on their behalf, to support this amendment on their behalf, and I urge this committee to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The next testifier is David Fisher. Welcome to the committee. Once you get to the table, please identify yourself for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Freiberg and members. I'm David Fisher. I'm a volunteer with Clean Elections Minnesota. We're here in support of an independent redistricting commission and reasonable limits on conflicts of interest and lobbying activity by former legislators. We've not yet taken a position on year-round legislature or on the bundling of constitutional amendments into a single initiative. We do support integrity in our election process and its results, and that every voice should be heard and every vote counted equally. In short, elections should be decided by voters, not by the very politicians competing for the support of those same voters. Today, more than 21 U.S. states are working with nonpartisan or bipartisan redistricting commissions. And although there have been hiccups, the reforms still work better than when maps were drawn by a handful of people in secret behind closed doors. In July 2018, the Brennan Center for Justice released research on commissions, finding, quote, a compelling case that commissions in charge of redistricting can significantly reduce many of the worst abuses associated with redistricting and improve outcomes and satisfaction across stakeholder spectrum, if carefully designed to promote independence and incentivize discussion and compromise. The Brennan Center recommended best practices to meet this end. An independent member selection process coupled with elements of randomness, a commission of 9 to 15 members to assure diversity and avoid deadlock, clear mapping criteria and map approval rules requiring support from across the political spectrum, strong transparency requirements making commission proceedings accessible and accessible, an enforceable guarantee of adequate funding for operations, and time allowed to hold public hearings, obtain feedback, get necessary adjustments, and draw final maps. The bills before you today, both 4598 and 4593, address these reforms and we support those reforms, and they do much more. We do hope that a single bill can come together quickly this session to reflect best practices and the recommendations of impacted and marginalized communities gathered in recent years by the League of Women Voters in Common Cause. Thank you, Chair Freeberg.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any members of the public who wish to testify on this bill? Welcome to the committee. Please come down and state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony. Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, we'll be glad to have you on the next bill as well. So are there any members who wish to testify on this bill? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to turn to amendments, of which there are several before member discussion. So the first amendment is the A2 amendment. Representative Davis, did you want to offer the A2 amendment?
I would like to offer the A2 amendment, Mr. Chair.
Please, to your amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just point out, Representative Long, I think you have more than one amendment here. I know you're proposing one amendment in this bill, but I see 3 amendments here. And so my amendment, it strikes lines 9 through 20 on page 2, which would strike the language related to legislative days and the end of the legislative session. This language opens the door for us to become a full-time legislature. And the folks that I serve in my district, they want me in my district. I live 2.5 hours away. I know Representative Scraba is like 5 hours away. Representative Burkell is 5 hours away. And we definitely don't want to open up the door in the Constitution to have a full-time legislature. And so I'm offering the A2 amendment. I would highly encourage us not to open this door. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Davis. Majority Leader Long to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd ask members oppose the A2 amendment. We have a tradition in Minnesota of constitutional amendments that include multiple related subjects. The legacy amendment is one where we've done funding for arts and culture in one amendment. These subjects are all good government topics, and so it makes sense to be on the ballot together. We don't have a system of referendum where we have a ton of different questions that we put on the ballot in this state. And so I'd ask members to oppose the amendment.
Representative Quam to the amendment.
Yes. Frankly, I'm confused what 80% of the states have part-time legislatures. Minnesota is not one of the largest states in the nation, population-wise, or actually geographically. And, I think it is inappropriate and unfair to our citizens to pile multiple things in the same amendment, which makes it tough for them. I like this one, but I wish we didn't have these other 2 in it. No, let's go ahead and have clean, clear, crisp amendments. Don't muddy things. Don't make things, kind of confusing, which is going to be more important. I want this, I don't want that. No, let's give them the right of choosing the amendment, a pure amendment. And your example of, combining, on that other topic, well, that was actually a very related to each other topic. The sourcing of the funds and the general not to supplant. But this full-time legislature, which I think is pretty controversial because it's not really common in most states, and you've got just about everything, everybody would agree not to have somebody lobbying for a year. I mean, that's a pretty easy thing. And then a convoluted change in redistricting, which is complex enough on its own to where it should be standing on its own. So I just am confused why it's all or nothing, throw it in together, and frankly, we did a lot better when we actually had bipartisan requirement to pass an election bill. And I think it's disingenuous to the people not to listen to a bipartisan input to get the best and most balanced. So vote yes.
Thanks. Just a clarification, I know one of the testifiers referenced a year-round legislature, and there have been some comments here about that too. The bill does not actually specify that. It just removes the time limit on legislative days. I know the majority leader mentioned examples.
Mr. Chair.
If you'd let me finish, about the legislature being able to address issues like unallotment, as well as the repeated special sessions we had during the shutdown. So, Representative Quam?
No, I think we'll get to debating exactly what is in and what is opened up by the different things, but I would say support this amendment.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, so seeing none, any closing remarks from
Yes,
Davis?
thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Long, you didn't even address my amendment. The amendment is to remove the language, page 2, lines 9 through 20, because this is opening the door for a full-time legislature. And just my personal opinion, Mr. Chair, what I've seen here is that's exactly what's going on here and what is wanted. And that is why I will be asking for a roll call, because this amendment addresses this issue. Representative Long wouldn't even address it. And we cannot open the door to a full-time legislature, because that is going to hurt greater Minnesota in the districts that we all serve. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right, a roll call's been requested. Clerk will take the roll. Chair votes no.
Vice Chair Greenman.
No.
Minority Leader Torkelson is excused. Representative Agbaje is excused. Representative Altendorf.
Aye.
Representative Bonner.
No.
Representative Bliss.
Aye.
Representative Coulter.
No.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Frederick.
No.
Representative Purcell.
No.
Representative Quam.
Aye.
Representative Vernig.
No.
There being 4 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment does not prevail. Representative Altendorf, would you like to move the A3 amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I'd like to move, this is the A3 amendment. This would reinstate line 11 on page 2. This would return the language capping the legislature at 120 legislative days without requiring the legislature to adjourn in May. So specifically to this amendment, again, there's just a lot going on in this amendment, and this would just specify the language so that we're very crystal clear as to what we're doing. And I think there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of gray area here. So this amendment then would cap it to that 120 days.
Thank you, Representative Altendorf. Majority Leader Long to the amendment.
Thank you, Chair Freiberg. Thank you for the amendment, Representative Altendorf. I think that's an important discussion on the number of legislative days. The situation I was thinking about was the pandemic, when we did have the need to meet more often, and it felt like the cap on legislative days would be constraining in an emergency situation like that. So that was the reason we scratched it. Certainly happy to engage in further conversation if this would earn your support.
Representative Purcell?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, this might be for Mr. Gehring, about what year the 120 legislative days was decided on. It's okay if you don't know that off the top of your head.
We're quizzing you, Mr. Gehring.
Mr. Chair, Representative Purcell, I can look it up quick and let you know.
Okay, we'll hold that thought. Representative Quam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm confused. I thought we were actually able to, during the pandemic, meet. In fact, we did it quite repeatedly, and yes, it was maybe not as easy as just deciding we can meet whenever, but there was a process. We followed it, and I thought the legislature did its duty. So I'm confused as to the 120 days limit didn't seem to prevent us in a pandemic and an emergency of actually doing our job. So I don't understand why, regular, maintaining the 120, unless you want to go full-time legislature is your intent. That's the only intent I can see of keeping the 120. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Majority Leader Long?
Mr. Chair, so we were meeting in special session, and the point I was trying to make was that we were at the whim of the governor to call us back into special session if the legislature determined that we were in an emergency and the governor didn't want us back in session, then 120 legislative days would be providing a limit.
All right, I don't have any other members on the list. I still see Matt Gehring looking through what looks like old historical records. I'm gonna guess it's somewhere in the 19th century, Representative Purcell. Yeah.
Look.
Okay. Oh, okay. I was just handed a sheet. I have no idea where it came from, but it says, oh, okay. Oh, nice. GOP researchers, thank you. It says a 1962 constitutional amendment raised the limit of legislative days from 90 to 120. It replaced the constitutional direction to meet biennially with a more explicit direction confining regular sessions to each odd-numbered year. So there you go, Representative Purcell. Okay. Any follow-up, Representative Purcell?
Well, thank you for that information. I think when we first became a state and the citizen legislature came only every other year to the Capitol, and it's 2024, and the business before us seems to have gotten, at least in my short time here, it's quite busy, and to make sure that we do our work in that amount of time has seemed challenging thus far. So just an observation.
All right, Representative Altendorf, any final comments? Okay, so the A3 amendment is before us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
No.
Okay, the motion does not prevail. All right, we have an A4 amendment. Representative Altendorf, I have that as yours as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So this one, the A4 amendment, without taking the A3, but I really think that we need to have clarifying language that the voters are going to see on the ballot. So we are adding in this amendment the wording to permit the legislature to meet full-time beyond 120 legislative days. And this is, so it's in the description very clearly. We're putting this so the voters understand exactly what they're voting for. This ensures that Minnesotans know what they're getting themselves into, that they are voting to extend the state legislature. And so this is my A4 amendment.
Majority Leader Long to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd ask that members oppose the amendment. There is no requirement in the amendment that there be any particular schedule for the legislature. It's simply removing the time limits on the number of days that we can meet and the mandatory adjournment date. So I think this is intended to essentially be a push-pull for voters to give them, to try to indicate a particular outcome which is not determined by the amendment.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, Representative Altendorf.
Yeah, thank you. You know, this really is as murky as mud going on right now. So if this is good government, we are not really being honest with the Minnesotans about what is happening in this bill. There's so much in this bill. There's so many different provisions. And what's moving forward is all being added, you know, unfortunately into one bill that is, I think, very ill-advised. If people really see what's in this bill, this is not, you know, the direction that I believe. I know Representative Purcell said she's been very busy. I don't think this is how government was intended. You know, we do not need to be here as much as we are. My theory is less government is better for the people, more freedom is better for the people. And we are really at a conflicting of interest right now where it seems like there's the majority party that is just adding more and more regulation, more and more government, more and more mandates. And I think a lot of the Minnesotans would really like us to go home and give them a break.
Okay, thank you. The A4 amendment is before us. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, the amendment does not prevail. I have the A5 amendment, Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now we get to discuss what we were discussing earlier. You know, so I listened to your testifiers. I took some notes here. Your very first testifier just touched on redistricting. Your second one, by the way, congratulations on becoming an American citizen. Where'd she go?
She had to go home.
Oh, bummer. She briefly mentioned the full-time legislature. Third one, redistricting and lobbying. Fourth one, redistricting, lobbying, and no position on the full-time legislature. So I think this is very confusing to the voters to have this all on one amendment. Yes, there have been in the past multiple, but they all relate to one another. These do not relate to one another at all. They're completely separate. I myself could find myself voting for one or two of these. Definitely not the full-time legislature. I might take a little bit of change to the Redistricting Commission. But we can't, it's a good governance bill. This is not good governance to have it all split in three. So my amendment simply splits it out into the three amendments, doesn't take any of them off the ballot, doesn't take any of the wording and change it. It just separates them into three, just like we do on the floor with the division. These can easily be divided and easily put on the ballot as separate amendments, and I urge you to accept this amendment.
Majority Leader Long to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment has the same challenge as the last one, which is that it includes the misleading language on lines 1.16 and 1.17. We also have had, as I mentioned, multiple part amendments in the past that are combined into one. I think arts and legacy certainly are tied together in some ways, but they are also separate committees up here in terms of how we view them. So you could certainly argue they're different subjects. We've put those in one question before in the past, and I don't see any reason why these are any less related than the questions we've had on the ballot in the past.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Long, the past is the past, and these are three separate subjects. Opening the door for a full-time legislature, Article 4, Section 12. Redistricting here, Independent Redistricting Commission. You're actually adding an article to the Constitution. And then one that I'm actually, thank you, Representative Long, a big fan of is legislators must wait a year before they can become a lobbyist. I'll thank you for that one. But this is clearly three different subjects. And please, sir, I would highly encourage you to offer these as three separate amendments, because I can tell you, I love that part of it. But yet, when I go to vote, I'm going to have to vote no on it because of the other two things I completely disagree with. I know for a fact there's going to be a lot of Minnesotans in that same position, or someone's going to like only one, or they're going to like two and not like one. That's not fair to the voter. That's not fair to the people of Minnesota. And we, the people of Minnesota, deserve better than that. So I'm a freshman, so I wasn't here in the past. Yeah. This is what we need to do moving forward. I would highly encourage you, and I ask you, please accept this amendment. Let's make these three separate amendments, sir. Thank you, Representative Long. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Quam.
You know, I'm a little bit confused in that it's all the author's way. There's obviously concern about dividing it, and I see no pain or no loss in your bill by allowing three separate amendments. In the past, there used to be bipartisan discussion, and at least listening to, I can see where maybe we should divide it up and allow people individual choice, but I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing no intent at all to working with the other side of the aisle, working with people to represent a large portion of the state, and I'm disappointed at the determination that, we won't even consider the dividing of the three. You don't like the wording of it? Okay. Then you could have said, I'm hearing you, and I will separate it into three. I don't like the language. I didn't hear that at all. I just heard, no, it should all be one. That's what, government is having a conversation and listening to the two sides, and to reject totally an easy suggestion of separate out the three so that people aren't confused, they're not torn between, and they can vote for exactly what they want. giving people a choice. Wow. I thought that was democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Representative Bliss, closing remarks on the.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, it is disappointing to hear the author of the bill saying he's not going to accept this. Some people watching this might assume because there's broad support for two of the items that the third one is thrown in there as a catch-all and maybe get passed. I'm not drawing that inference. I'm just saying some people watching this might. I'm very disappointed that the author has asked for a no vote on this, and I would like a voice call. Roll call,
Roll call's been requested.
not a recall.
Chair Freiberg.
This is for the A5 amendment. Freiberg votes no.
Vice Chair Greenman.
No.
Minority Leader Torkelson and Representative Agbaje are excused. Representative Altendorf.
Aye.
Representative Bonner.
No.
Representative Bliss.
Aye.
Representative Coulter.
No.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Frederick.
No.
Representative Purcell.
No.
Representative Quam.
Yes.
Representative Vernick.
No.
There being 4 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Davis, you have the A6 amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the A6 amendment moves the vote on the amendment from 2024 to 2026 to allow additional time to have public input, Mr. Chair, on this legislation and have a broader conversation for the public on what we need. We need a bipartisan solution. And I'll just point out, so far, you guys have rejected bipartisanship in elections when it comes to the discussion of having a constitutional amendment put out to the folks. We need bipartisanship on this. And so that's what my amendment would do. I think we need to slow down, have bipartisan support on this, and the A6 amendment is a great opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Majority Leader Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would urge members to vote no. I believe that the amendment is one that the public would broadly support and can easily and readily understand. There is broad support for good government and for the provisions in the amendment.
Representative Quam.
What is the rush? I mean, there was discussion from the majority, well, the speaker, about having an amendment, but giving it, instead of 2024, having it 2026 on a different amendment for the people, to give the people enough time to analyze. Totally redoing the system, which we've got several election cycles before we'd even get to redistricting. We have to do it in just a few months. Don't give a lot of time for the people. I am wondering what maybe I don't notice in this bill, that we have to do it before people actually notice it. I see nothing wrong with giving to 2 extra years so there can be a real broad discussion and understanding amongst the population, because then you would still have year after year after year past that to implement it. So what is the rush? What are we hiding?
Representative Davis, any closing remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the 2030 census is a long ways away. Redistricting is a long ways away, Representative Long. And again, please vote yes on this amendment. We need to slow down. We need to have bipartisan support on this decision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the A6 amendment is before us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. The amendment does not prevail. Okay, Representative Quam, you have the A7 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in the same spirit of not allowing legislators to go into, trying to bend our arms and lobby us, Frankly, if we're going to have an independent group doing this, we need to add that individuals employed by an entity that receives government funds through direct appropriation by the legislature, in other words, that don't get their livelihood from direct government funding. That is pretty close to the kind of influence. If you're a lobbyist, you're getting your, money directly, your income directly from government activities. And I don't want to put a stumbling stone or temptation amongst these people to, let that influence them. So if we really want a independent, redistricting, we should wholeheartedly say yes. So I ask for a roll call and ask for people to support this improvement to the bill.
Majority Leader Long to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask members to vote no. The other provisions in the list in terms of the restrictions on who can serve on the Redistricting Commission are for elected officials, staff, former elected officials, essentially those who have a direct interest in the outcome of the election because of their personal ties to an official or because they were or are an elected official. This language goes far beyond that, and by my reading could include a school teacher that works for a school that receives state government funding. So I don't believe that this is an appropriate addition to the list.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you for that. And I just worry that this language is overly broad. So does that mean that if a farmer in Greater Minnesota receives some sort of subsidy for their crops, does that then make the farmer ineligible as well? Does that make a school teacher ineligible? Does that make someone who is working at a food pantry who might receive government grants for funding ineligible? I would argue that all three of those cases are individuals that I would love to see serve in the legislature and would be proud to have as colleagues. And I find this language very problematic, and that is so overly broad that this could encompass just about everyone in every walk of life. And I find that really discomforting. So I would urge members to vote no.
Representative Quam. Closing
Just to correct the representative, this bill is not defining who is allowed to be in the legislature. You said you would love to have the people serve in the legislature. This is the people that draw the lines in an entity that receives direct appropriation. In other words, that's directly to that entity. A general funding for education isn't to a specific entity. And, we can clarify, but isn't the intent to make sure that there is no undue influence to this? So, frankly, I'll withdraw this amendment if the author actually will work with me to come up with a way that we prevent direct appropriations to entities that are earmarked or singled out, and get really precise language, because I get the intent that you don't want this broad, but I hope that there's an intent from the members of this committee that we prevent pay-for-play type activities, and some of those things should be common sense. So if we got restrictions to try and prevent that direct correlating influence, then let's make sure that we are more thorough in that. And so I'll withdraw this in the spirit of working together to make a better bill. and I hope that we can work together.
Thank you. The A7 amendment has been withdrawn. Representative Altendorf, you have the A8 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'd like to move the A8 amendment.
Yep.
Okay.
It's before us.
Sorry, okay, yep. So this requires a special session of the legislature, of the legislation that's passed to consider additional appropriations to the legislature, including member per diem, housing, extra staff pay, salaries, and all those other costs that are going to go along with this.
Majority Leader Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment is unnecessary. The legislature would be able to set their time for a meeting, as I have indicated, and I indicated the many reasons why that's a good idea in terms of the balance of powers and giving the legislature an equal footing with the executive. But there's no need to set up a special session for a process that seems to be presumed by the author of the amendment.
Any additional discussion to the amendment? Closing.
No, Mr. Chair, yeah, I mean, again, we just went through 8 amendments or 7, and it's just awfully disappointing to see such vague responses of clarification. And it seems so murky that all we're trying to do is clarify, for the voters of Minnesotans to get more bipartisan support on this. And it's just, it's very disappointing to see the lack of effort.
Okay. The A8 amendment is before us. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, the amendment is not adopted. That concludes our amendments. Member discussion. Representative Quam, were you on the list for this part earlier? Did you want to go now? I guess you're the de facto lead at this point. Would you like to wait until other members have spoken?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't want to say something they would say because I trust their voices, and so I'll sit back and be illuminated by their discussion.
As we all will. Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, we're here. The governor has stated he wants bipartisan election bills. We've offered several, non-controversial. They were just to clear the language up a little bit, to be crystal clear to the Minnesota public and the Minnesota voters what they're voting on this. Even the additional language about extending beyond 120 days, it wasn't saying that we had to meet beyond 120 days. It just says that we could. And again, I think if this is clarified to the residents of Minnesota and the voters, I don't think they would find that too attractive. Again, the other two, you could get me on definitely the lobbying one. I would definitely vote for that one. I'd have to see some modifications to the Redistricting Commission, but I'm not opposed to it. But I am 100% opposed to a full-time legislature. We are a citizen government. I have a business. I go home. I know my people. I go to the local stores. And Representative Davis mentioned the distance we live from. I live 4 hours and 10 minutes from here. It's not a trivial thing for me to drop what I'm doing at my business. I have no employees. I run a relatively good-sized operation. I would have to find somebody to cover for me. It is seasonal, so this works out good for me. But again, they were very non-controversial. It opened up the, we're trying to get people to trust the system a little bit more. And by just these simple additions to the bill, we're not changing the heart and soul of the bill. It was just trying to be more give more clarification to the public. So once again, I'm very disappointed. All Republican input on this is ignored and dropped. We could have worked on the language that you didn't like in the on my amendment. You said it increased the 120 days. We probably could have maybe worked on that, but no, it was just shot down. So again, I'm disappointed. Once again, the governor requested that we work in a bipartisan manner on election bills, and today we showed that we can't do that. Thank you.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This absolutely does open the door, I'll repeat it again, for us to become a full-time legislature year-round Congress of Minnesota. 40 states in our nation are part-time, like we are currently. They got it right. We have it right currently, right now. And again, in the state of Minnesota, we can already call special sessions. You proved that through the pandemic, that we can call special sessions. It's, we can do this already. We don't need to open the door for full-time legislation. I'm a pastor. I'm a full-time pastor, Representative Long. And I let people know when they were voting for me when I was out on the campaign trail. I did not hide that fact. I was actually very open and honest with people about it. And my district, District 6A, welcomed that. They were happy to send me to represent District 6A. And becoming full-time, spending way too much time down here and not in my district where my constituents live, and being a pastor at the church that I've served faithfully at for 5 years, that is definitely going to be a huge disruption. And that's not what the folks of my district want. I think it's real easy for us to, I think it's real easy for politicians, representatives down here in the metro area to again have a one-size-fits-all for all of Minnesota. We live in greater Minnesota. Greater Minnesota wants its representatives in the district, serving them. And to be honest with you, I do treat this as a full-time job, even though it's a part-time job. I treat it as a full-time job. This last spring, summer, and fall, I spent a lot of time in my district going to events, meeting with people, going to their houses, greeting them in the towns and in the townships. Even out hunting, I would run into them. This is opening the door to put an end to all that. We do need to slow down. Representative Long, I hope that you would slow down, that you would work in a bipartisan manner. Come now, let us reason together, reach across the aisle, Representative Long, and meet us in the middle, Representative Long. I'll repeat, Representative Long. Meet us in the middle, reach across the aisle. Let's reason together on this. Let's bring this as 3 separate amendments to we the people, with whom all the inherent power of government has been given. Let's bring this to the people in 3 separate amendments. Thank you, Representative Long. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Davis. Is there any additional member? Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Long. You know, okay, so again, there's just such a discrepancy here of the concept of what the legislature does, and we're supposed to be serving the people. Truly, we're supposed to be serving the people. We're not supposed to be here full-time. That's not what the intent of this was. When I hear even the group Clean Elections, which thank you for your testimony, you know, testified that they were not sure how they stood on this. You know, it should speak volumes that there is too much being put into one bill. So I do have a question for Representative Long, and that is next door to us, we have the state office building expansion growing. That did not come through the state legislature as a vote for us to vote on. It went through a committee. And so I was always very puzzled why we were building such a huge building over there. And so Representative Long, you know, now that we're proposing this, and it looks like we're moving towards or opening up the door towards a full-time state legislature, is that the intent of that building?
Again, thank you, Representative Altendorf. It's a little bit unrelated to the topic before us, but I'll allow a little leeway. Majority Leader Long, do you have any brief response to it?
Sure, Chair Freiberg. The building did get a vote before the body, and it was supported on a bipartisan basis by the Senate Republican leadership at the time and the House Democratic leadership. It had 2 committee hearings in 2021 in the Rules Committee before it was approved. We are moving forward with the building because the building that we are sitting in right now is deficient, as rated by independent analysts. The roof is leaking. We've had water damage. We've had people injured in the building. It is not ADA accessible. We need a new building and we need new construction. And the additional space that is being constructed is all public space. It is hearing rooms. It is public meeting space. It is space for the Secretary of State. It is space for the Legislative Reference Library. It is the public functions of government that we are not serving well with the building that we have that is crumbling under our feet.
If we could stick to the elections issues, since this is the Elections Committee, Representative Altendorf.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I guess thank you for that leniency, but, it does seem like this is all related. It does seem like it is. I think most voters can see that this is all the intent of the direction of where this is going. I would like to ask another question, if I may, of Representative Long. I think this is an important question. This is my first term, so 2023, now moving into 2024. Sitting on the Elections Committee, I was told that this was a sacred committee, that the elections were held to be bipartisan, that every other session that elections have always been bipartisan, that both parties agree on elections, and I believe that has been held sacred until 2023. So my question to you, Representative Long, is your party, the majority party, you have all aspects of the Minnesota government, state government at every level, the governor, the Senate, and the House. What with the elections didn't work out for the Democrat Party?
This is also getting a little bit afield, Representative Altendorf, from the amendment that's before us. So do you have?
I'm happy to respond.
Sure.
So there seems to be this mythology around bipartisan election work. If I recall, there was an amendment that was put on the ballot entirely by the GOP that would have restricted the access to the ballot based on a photo ID, and that was rejected by the Minnesota voters. This, too, is being put to the voters as a question, and so it will be up to the voters and the people of Minnesota whether or not they want to approve this amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
could
for.
wrap it up.
I will. Thank you for your leniency. If we're truly putting this for the voters, then we need to make this crystal clear. We need to put this very black and white, and there is too much in this amendment. It's just that I cannot make this any more clear. This is very deceptive to the Minnesota voters. It's wrong. It shouldn't go to, this is bad legislation, bad government. We're being very lazy at the best and very deceptive at the worst. So I just, again, the Minnesota voters, I hope, see through this.
Okay. Is there any additional member discussion? Okay, I was unclear if you wanted to, so Representative Qualm, you can have the last word here.
Well, the second to last word, probably.
Fair.
Just clarifying that the author just referenced to the ID requirement, and actually in 08 Crawford v. It was an election board. Justice Stevens wrote the majority opinion by the U.S. Supreme Court, and in that, it not only upheld that that was a reasonable thing to ensure confidence in voter integrity, every group that was concerned it would disenfranchise saw an increase of voter turnout with the photo ID. So that was part of the basis for that determination. I just wanted to make clear the implication was that it was some crazy idea, and actually it's in line with Supreme Court precedents. But getting back to the discussion, in the testimony, there's discussion about independent commissions in California. There's been a bit of analysis indicating that that independent commission is not quite as independent as the definition ought to be. There was discussion from testifiers about, they brought up trifecta. Actually, do you know when the last 2 trifectas have been? Directly after the redistricting. 13, 14, 23, 24. Those were after the redistricting. And so, that's sort of generated and there's only been one party that's had a trifecta since the early 70s when party designation was implemented. So I think there's a lot of details, precision that we're not going to get to cover because this is being rushed. And, the idea of expanding and making it more full-time, my concern about Congress is that they spend too much time away from their communities they're representing. And I love going back and being in with, my neighbors, my communities, being available. I have people walking up to me in the grocery store, youth sports, school activities, community activities, and saying, I'm glad you guys did this. And sometimes, well, actually, I probably hear more from people that are upset than happy, but that's just the human nature. And they tell me things. But by being in the community, they communicate to me things that they want changed. And that's where I come up with these different amendments, the different bills. It's from the people that I represent. And some of what I say here is because I have constituents saying, please tell them this or talk about this, because I am their voice. And I think the voice is diminished a little bit when I lose that connectivity. And that's part of my resistance to the possibility of opening the door to a more full-time legislature. And that's part of the reason why I want this to be separate questions, so we can get the true sense of the people on each of these components. And I'm very willing to sit down with the author and try and build something that can be bipartisan, because I've done that with some of the members here, and I've had members from the other side of the aisle work with me and make my bills better. But I'm disappointed, maybe not as surprised as I ought to be, but I'm disappointed, and I can't support this bill that the door's closed to the voice of the people I represent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Long, any closing remarks?
Brief, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the discussion tonight, members. I think that the balance of powers question is not a partisan issue. I've had conversations with several Republican legislators who do see the value of having the legislature have an equal footing with the governor, who often may not be of the same party. And in terms of the scheduling question, Wisconsin does not have a limit on their days of meeting right now. So they don't have the every 3-day requirement, which we are also striking in this bill, and it means that they actually meet for fewer session days than we do, and they meet only 3 days a week in committee. So Representative Davis, you could have an extra day at home to be with your constituents before coming back up. I was glad to hear the universal support for closing the lobbying revolving door, and glad to hear the strong support for nonpartisan redistricting. I wish that we'd had that bipartisan support 6 years ago, when we could have taken this action before the last round of redistricting, but better late than never. And I think that Minnesotans strongly support nonpartisan redistricting, strongly want to see their government more accessible, more improved, and fair. And I look forward to further conversation with members across the aisle and further conversation with community members as well to improve this bill as we move forward.
Thank you, Majority Leader Long. I will renew the motion that House File 4598 as amended be re-referred to the State and Local Government Finance and Policy Committee. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, the motion prevails. Thank you, Majority Leader Long. Your bill is on your way. The second bill on the agenda is House File 4593 from Chair Klevorn. Welcome to the committee, Chair Klevorn. While you come down, I will move House File 4593 be re-referred to the State and Local Government Finance and Policy Committee. So, thank you for your patience, Chair Klevorn. When you are ready, please describe your bill.
Thank you, Chair Freiberg and Lead Qualm, and members of the committee for hearing House File 4593 this evening. From what I'm hearing, tonight's a good night for Minnesota citizens. It sounds like we have a lot of agreement that the voices in Minnesota need to be heard. This legislation before us tonight is over 7 years in the making. We started this journey in 2017 with our 2019 legislation, House File 1605, which I was pleased to author. Many diverse voices, both GOP and DFL, from all regions of our state have been brought into this legislation before us tonight. A few are here with us tonight. We have heard concerns from 2019 in House File 1605, and we incorporated changes. We heard comments in the 2021 redistricting process, and we incorporated changes. I'd like to thank my partners who are here with me tonight for their hard work, and I would especially like to thank Anastasia Belladonna Carrera, who could not be with us this evening. With me tonight to answer technical questions will be Paul Huffman, and I just want to make this really clear. House File 4593 is singularly focused on redistricting and the creation of a Citizens Independent Redistricting Commission, or if the citizens decide, an advisory redistricting commission. The important statement here is citizen, keeping the voices of Minnesotans front and center in the process of democracy and who will be chosen to represent them in government. This is the With Us, For Us redistricting bill. The bill is comprised of 3 articles. Article 1 is the constitutional amendment. Shall the Minnesota Constitution be amended to establish a Citizens Redistricting Commission that is independent of the legislature to draw legislative and congressional redistricting plans? Article 2 sets out the enabling legislation, from definitions, selection process to the commissioners, ensuring diversity of our state, removal of commissioners, filling vacancies, duties outlined, public hearing requirements, data requirements, and the role of the Legislative Coordinating Commission in the redistricting process. And most importantly, it sets out the principles to guide the redistricting process, including priority of those principles. Article 3 is the Citizens Advisory Redistricting Commission, should the constitutional amendment not be adopted by the voters, and it sets a similar process for the commission to advise the legislature in the work of redistricting. This is a very high-level overview of the bill, and I would ask you, Mr. Chair, to please recognize Dan Vicuna with Common Cause as my first testifier.
Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Dan Vicuna, Director of Redistricting and Representation at Common Cause. I'm here today, of course, to testify in support of House File 4593, the With Us, For Us redistricting amendment, proposing a historic first in Minnesota, a new approach to drawing the state's voting districts, putting the needs of communities squarely at the center of the process. In Minnesota, as you know, state law currently mandates that the redistricting process happen through normal legislation subject to veto by the governor. The peril, of course, in this process is what we've seen time and time again across the country. Elected officials slicing and dicing communities without regard to their right to fair representation in order to protect incumbents and maximize partisan advantage. In Minnesota, The coincidence of divided government during years ending in 0 over the last 6 decades has resulted in a stalemate in maps drawn by a judicial panel. Unfortunately, the judicial process has very little transparency and provides few guarantees that the public's needs will be prioritized. The most recent census data shows that all of Minnesota's population growth was driven by communities of color. In effect, this saved Minnesota's 8th congressional seat, beating out New York and surprising observers nationwide. Unfortunately, this is no guarantee of a seat at the table for those communities when new districts are drawn. In the last cycle, Common Cause participated in the judicial panel process as co-plaintiffs alongside our statewide partners. We were incredibly proud of the victories our organizing and collective grassroots achieved. The unity maps we submitted, informed by impacted communities, proved that when given the chance, Minnesotans can draw maps that fairly represent everyone. One of the 4 groups of litigants, the unity maps called the Cordy Plan, our maps drew the most opportunity districts for people of color, the most majority-minority districts, and had the fewest city splits when drawing districts. We accomplished that while still abiding by all the court's instructions and established precedents on redistricting principles. However, the final maps the judicial panel approved fell short in some respects, and the panel stated explicitly in the opinion accompanying the maps that it believed it was not empowered to make wholesale changes to existing boundaries. In a state with growing communities of color and native nations that contribute mightily to the state's population growth, economic activity, and cultural vitality, institutional inertia and the status quo simply will not do. House File 4593 provides a better way, which is why supporters sent over 1,000 letters to the Senate Elections Committee and 735 to this committee. It would implement one of the most proven and effective reforms for modernizing democracy, an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission to draw the state's U.S. House and state legislative districts. It would mandate an open and transparent process led by a politically balanced group of Minnesotans who've been screened, are under oath, and subject to removal to make sure that no political insiders play a role in the drawing of districts. Drawing districts that center and balance the needs of a state's diverse communities requires a body whose members resemble the state, the open-mindedness that comes from not having a personal stake in how districts are drawn, and a lot of listening. The With Us For Us bill ensures all those things and was co-created with impacted communities, legislative stakeholders from both sides of the aisle and chamber, our members, community stakeholders, and allies. It makes communities of interest a top criterion and requires the newly created commission to travel across Minnesota to learn about these communities in open hearings. This bill creates a redistricting advisory group consisting of the executive directors of the state's ethnic and other nonpartisan councils working with protected groups to ensure that the pool of commission applicants represents the diversity of the state, including geographic diversity. It prohibits partisan and racial gerrymandering and requires maps to be approved with the support of commissioners in the DFL, Republican, and independent/third-party camps. Common Cause is thankful to Representative Klevorn for her leadership in co-creating a vision for an inclusive democracy that stemmed from Minnesotans coming together. We're grateful to our allies for years of work to analyze what will make redistricting work for Minnesotans, and proud to support House File 4593 to chart a new path forward for fair representation.
Thank you for your testimony, Dan Vicuña. I have a few people who've signed up to testify. We'll ask testifiers to keep it to about 2 minutes. First on the list is Jovita Morales, and after Jovita Morales will be May Yang. Welcome to the committee. Glad to have you here. Thank you for your patience. So please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jovita Morales, and I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Minnesota Immigrant Movement. We are a grassroots nonprofit that focuses on coming together to build solidarity with and build movements among Latino Minnesotans around issues impacting us. Today, I'm here to support of HF 4593 and to ask that you stand with us in solidarity with and vote yes in our authentic allies for the work we've been doing as a community for those past 5 years. In central, in southern Minnesota, Minnesota Immigrant Movement organized communities in more than 10 cities like St. Peter, Leisure Center, Waseca, Glencoe, Mankato, Fairville, is Northfield, Bloomington, Shakopee, Burnsville, and Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and Minneapolis. We met to educate our communities and our families about the importance of voting, understanding how our vote connects directly to individuals and collective political power, and how important it is that we are seeing in this process. There is a false narrative in Minnesota that we as the immigrants are all ineligible to vote. That is fake news. In Minnesota, the far majority of immigrants, Minnesotans, are not only eligible to vote, but we do. We land more than 15 sessions in each city, in 3 sessions in each one of the cities mentioned. Many of us, we have lived in countries where they don't have system of democracy in place. We very much want to be part of a process in creating a healthy, strong, and accessible democracy in Minnesota, where everyone has an equal say and are equitable seen. We came together and we work with Common Cause, Minnesota Voices for Racial Justice, ASER, COPY, Klevorn, many other organizations, including the Minnesota Council of Foundations, and just name some of that we work hard to shape that we will make the process of drawing our district maps fair, where everyone could have a say and participate. We create community of interest maps and came together to talk and negotiate where lines would be drawn and make sure that no one was left behind. We inform our unity maps and make Minnesota history, because together we prove that we could center Minnesotans, including BIPOC Minnesotans, and still come out with a solid map.
If you could wrap up your testimony.
It is time to fix the problem and leaving our presentation in the minimal underage. I ask you to stand in solidarity with us and vote yes on HF 4595. It is the best bill because it doesn't have just the politician think is good or what people outside Minnesota think is good. HF 4593 has all of that, and it also has what we community think is good for democracy in Minnesota. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. The next testifier is May Yang, and after May Yang will be Osman Ahmed. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Good evening, chairs and members of the committee. My name is May Yang. I'm the Senior Policy and Partnerships Manager with the Minnesota Council on Foundations. MCF is a statewide association of grant makers focused on ensuring Minnesota has a strong charitable sector and an inclusive democracy where everyone can thrive. MCF supports House File 4993, which promotes a more inclusive democracy by establishing redistricting processes and principles that maximize community input and participation, allowing for all Minnesotans to have a role in ensuring district lines reflect their community needs and priorities. MCF knows firsthand the power of community-informed redistricting and what independent commissions can produce. During the 2021 redistricting cycle, we partnered with 12 BIPOC-led and serving organizations to form the RMAPS Minnesota Unity Cohort. This group led over 100 hours of training and education, which drew participation from more than 400 community members. Through this engagement, more than 40 community of interest maps were produced. The cohort then used these maps to draw a recommended legislative and congressional map. The outcome was a community-led redistricting plan that kept COIs together, united Minnesota's northern Native communities in one congressional district, and more. Most importantly, the experience proved that an independent redistricting commission not only is possible, but has the power to produce maps that truly reflect Minnesota's communities. Furthermore, this experience showed that not only do historically underrepresented communities desire to be engaged in the redistricting process, but they can in fact lead it. The committee is hearing two bills this evening which aim to improve the redistricting process by creating an independent redistricting commission. MCF is testifying on behalf of House File 4593, as this bill was created by community and directly informed by their participation in the most recent redistricting process. Since 2018, there has been consistent work by many community groups to craft an independent redistricting commission bill, and these efforts have been strengthened after community efforts during the last redistricting cycle. House File 4593 is a community-crafted bill that reflects deep community engagement and honors the wisdom, time, and experience of the community. We urge you to support this standalone redistricting bill. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. Next testifier is Osman Ahmed. Is Osman Ahmed here?
It is sundown.
Oh, I apologize. We had some conflicting information about that. So I apologize for that. If Osman Ahmed would like to submit written testimony, we can certainly accept that as well.
Thank you.
Brian Cook is next. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Great. Chair Freiberg and members of the Elections, Finance, and Policy Committee. My name is Brian Cook. I'm the Director of Energy and Elections Policy for the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of our thoughts on Representative Klevorn's House File 4593. The Minnesota Chamber, which represents over 6,300 businesses with over 500,000 employees, supports changes to Minnesota's state election process to allow for greater voter contact and participation. The conduct of legislative elections and sessions are themselves a business issue with real-life, long-lasting impacts on companies of all sizes, their employees, and the communities that they support. Like every Minnesota citizen, businesses are subject to taxes, regulations, and laws. Many business owners believe the process of making laws has been overwhelmed by polarization and political gamesmanship. That's why the Chamber's had a long-standing position that Minnesota should draw legislative district lines by a commission. Minnesota's current process requires the governor and legislature to pass legislation setting these new boundaries. However, this process has not been successfully completed in over 50 years without intervention by state or federal courts. Minnesota has an opportunity to adopt a more effective system before the 2030 redistricting cycle. We believe that a redistricting commission must be evenly balanced in its partisanship and based on principles that are mutually agreeable and comply with applicable state and federal laws. Minnesota has a long-standing tradition of requiring bipartisan support for significant election law changes, a standard that has promoted stability and helped Minnesotans retain their voice at critical moments. We believe bipartisanship should remain the standard in this sensitive and important policy area, especially when it comes to fundamental changes to the way in which we determine our legislative districts. We expect the mechanics of a redistricting commission to be determined through the collaborative work of majority and minority caucuses in both bodies. We also appreciate Representative Klevorn's approach that a redistricting commission should be contained in a proposed constitutional amendment without other unrelated provisions. This proposal should pass or fail based on its own merits, not those of other issues. We do also have specific concerns, though, about lines 7.25 through 8.2 of the bill. Using statewide proportionality to try to calculate the political leanings of a proposed redistricting plan can lead to backdoor political gerrymandering. Legislators should not be determining who their voters are, and those voters should not be bound by historical voting patterns, especially if there is no recognition of potential voting pattern differences between statewide and legislative races. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our thoughts on House File 4593, and the Chamber looks forward to remaining engaged as this proposal is further developed and considered by the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any members of the public who wish to testify on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we can turn to amendments. Representative Davis, you have the A1 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the A1 amendment just moves the date. If you look at Representative Klevorn, page 9, 9.8, line 8 there, it says, well, it just changes 2024 to 2026. So the A1 amendment, it allows additional time to have public input on the legislation and have a broader conversation on what a bipartisan solution to redistricting, to a redistricting commission would look like. Again, 2030 is a long ways away. I think this is a real common sense amendment to this language, and thank you for the bill.
Chair Klevorn to the amendment.
Thank you, Chair Freiberg. I would ask for a no vote. And as I stated in my introduction, this work has been started in 2017. A bill was brought in 2019. Changes were incorporated. I did meet with Lead Torkelson earlier to discuss this date change. And until I talk to my partners in this work, I would not be able to accept this amendment. But happy to work with you going forward.
Any additional discussion to the amendment? Closing remarks, Representative Davis?
Just a question. Do you think it's a good idea to allow the voters more time to educate themselves on an amendment they're going to be voting on?
Chair Klevorn.
I'm not sure that I understand the question, because if we changed, I understand now, sorry. So you're saying put it on the ballot this year and not implement it until 2026? I just asking for clarification.
Representative Davis.
Yeah, submitted to the people in 2026 on the ballot.
I mean, I think the question is just whether, whether this needs an additional 2 years for discussion. I mean, I'm sure there've been many examples of amendments that have gone onto the ballot during the same year that they're legislatively that they're voted on. Is that, I mean, your question, Representative
Okay,
Davis?
so, the premise is, it's 2024. We want to make sure that it's clear that people will know what they're voting on. And so moving it to 2026, I think, would be a great idea. Give them more time to educate themselves on the amendment.
Yeah, Chair Klevorn.
Thank you, Representative Davis and Chair Freiberg, for the question. I would say to you, the people are asking for this bill now. This bill has come from the citizens of Minnesota. The conversations with citizens in Minnesota have driven this work. So this is a bill that they created, they know about, and they have had much discussion about. I don't think they will be surprised to see it on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any additional discussion? Okay,
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative Davis. The A1 amendment is before us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. The amendment does not prevail. My understanding is the A2 amendment has been withdrawn. That was, okay, correct. So any member discussion to the amendment, to the bill, I should say? Everyone sufficiently discussed the previous one? Okay. Representative Quam.
Again, first of all, I must say it's nice that it is more of a single focus topic. Two, the author is sounding more open to at least considering and discussing. So those are good things. I would disagree that the vast majority of the communities in greater Minnesota are even aware of this conversation. And my first experience was after the turn of the century for the 2002 cycle is when the Senate came around and had meetings around the state to talk about the redistricting and then have conversations of input about the redistricting. I thought that was nice because if nothing more, the people felt as if they were part of the discussion. And if we're going to change the system, I would love to have part of the new system to where there are regional hearings and public discussions across the state so that everyone on the commission or whatever you want to call it have a chance to hear from the people, the citizens in the different parts of the state. So they have an understanding maybe in how you draw in northern Minnesota. There are different considerations because of the different communities and et cetera. And there might be boundaries in areas that have commonality that are not obvious to some person that's not familiar with that or hasn't been down there. So I'm not against the general idea. I think there needs to be a broader fleshing out of the topic to make sure that we engage. And we're trying to get people, but there's no guarantee with what the bill says that we're going to have people from all over. Well, the next best thing is to make sure that the people that are part of that group get to go all over and interact with the communities so they can better understand the continuity and the grouping and the redistricting that makes sense to the area so that they have a common voice. Because I want a better system, and if we have a discussion between different ideas, we can maybe globally come together on something that's going to cover it better. So I think I've covered everything, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Klevorn. You know, I know you and I came into the legislature at the same time, and I remember this being a topic of large concern at that time, almost 6 years ago now. And I know it had predated even you and I, quite candidly. And anecdotally, I know, although this is maybe not a scientific poll, I know we've done numerous polls, I think, on this topic, if I'm not mistaken, at the state fair, which is a fairly representative population of all over the state. I work there a lot, and love it for exactly that reason. But what we've seen is that, generally speaking, whether you poll someone at the state fair or in polls across the state, we see that, generally speaking, Minnesotans have a significantly high degree of agreement that they would like to see an independent redistricting commission, that basic fairness is very important to them, that it ranks high in their priorities in the democratic process. And I know that in those years that I have seen and I have watched you work extensively with groups outside of this legislature on this legislation to try to bring consensus forward, to have conversations, to bring people to the table. And I know that a good number of the provisions in this bill are very similar to the Long Bill. And I suspect that they have informed each other and that work has transcended in multiple ways. That the voices in this room have been heard in both of those directions. And so I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for all of that work, because I know that it has been a long road, and I know that we've gotten here. I would say I don't think we need to wait. I think that the people of Minnesota have been very clear. Before we said we didn't want to do redistricting because it was too close to the census. Now we're saying we don't want to do redistricting because it's too far away from the next census. I think the bottom line is, for a very long time, the people of Minnesota have said loud and clear, they really want to do this. And doing it now gives us additional time to incorporate all of these changes and make sure that they can be applied in a reasonable and effective way. So thank you for the time.
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Klevorn, for bringing this forward. I think this really is an important conversation that, frankly, I think Minnesotans do want to have. And I would say right now is absolutely the time to have it when we have just come off of a redistricting cycle, and folks are aware of, to be frank, the chaos of our current process. And I think the other piece that I would like to mention is, it's been mentioned several times how, frankly, lucky we have been to have had divided government at each redistricting cycle, though there was one example recently within the last few decades where a legislatively passed map did become law. I won't get into the history nerd side of that. But I want to point out how close we've come to that not being the case. It was mentioned earlier, the 2010 governor's race. where but for fewer than 4,400 votes the other way, redistricting would have been entirely run by one party. But even more recently than that, 453 votes the other way in one Minnesota Senate race in 2020, and redistricting would have been controlled entirely by one party. I don't know about anybody else, but I don't like those odds. I think now is the time to have this conversation and really talk about how this process works. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other additional comments? Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, good point. It would be nice to get bipartisan support, but unfortunately, we have a Democrat trifecta right now. And I know we're going to be sending amendments to the people to vote on, and Republican voices in this committee is being shut out. You still don't have any bipartisan support. Representative Klevorn, I want to thank you, though, that you're bringing a single subject for an amendment. Thank you for that, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any additional comments? Okay. Seeing none, closing remarks. Representative Chair Klevorn.
Thank you very much, Chair Freiberg. And I would say everyone's invited to join this party. You're welcome. You're welcome to join this bill and to help improve it and make it better. It was informed by both Democratic and Republican voices and independents. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all bill. And I appreciate the comments from Brian Cook. I didn't expect to be sitting at the dais with him at any time when we were on opposite sides of the table. So I welcome you to join me in this work. And thank you, Chair Freiberg, for your time this evening. And I encourage a yes vote.
Thank you. With that, I will renew the motion that House File 4593 be re-referred to the State and Local Government Finance and Policy Committee. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Yeah. Okay, the motion prevails. House File 4593 is re-referred to the State and Local Government Finance and Policy Committee. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Spokojnej noci, Representative Quam. And this meeting's adjourned.